It's easier if you say I'm a terrible speaker, because then there's things will go. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes. It seems in the back it's a little iffy. Let's see. Does that make a difference?
You can pull the microphones forward, the two on the sides.
Two on the sides. There we go. I don't have to use teacher voice. Okay, so as Matt said, I am Brenda Romero. I am a game developer. I'm also a PhD student here at Trinity, doing a very weird PhD on games and agency in memoir. My PhD falls somewhere oddly between the School of English and Computer Science. Matt is one of my advisors. So today I'm going to talk about what I call the soul of the system and design, purpose, and play in games. And today, obviously, you've looked at the agenda. We're going to hear a lot about work in games for learning and games for cultural engagement and games and serious stories. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about what games can do outside these domains and speak about my personal experience as a game player, a designer, and a game developer exploring the possibility of games. And then I suspect there will be room for Q&A. I'm originally from New York. I've had 4 shots of espresso this morning, so I may end up talking exceedingly fast. Feel free to, I think I'm talking at a good clip now, but I may end up going very fast. And if you do this, I'll remember I'm from New York and have had too much espresso. So what's my story? So as Matt's mentioned, I'm a game designer. I am working on a game that I can't talk about, of course. We're using Unreal 5, it's with a major publisher. My husband's John Romero. He tends to make games where things explode. And so that is no different. It's a first-person shooter that we're working on. And when I say I'm a game designer, I usually get 1 of 3 possible reactions. And the first, depending on the person asking, if they're a kid, it's, oh my God, did you make Fortnite? And then I disappoint them and they're like, but did you make Minecraft? And no, I also didn't do that. If they are a teenager or an adult, it's like, well, did you work on Baldur's Gate 3 or maybe Starfield? But no, I'm far more disappointing than that. I'd say if I worked on any of those, I'd have a pile of cash about the size of Ireland. The great thing is like actually Baldur's Gate, a lot of the writing is done here in Dublin for Baldur's Gate 3. And I think what's really exciting about the industry is that Minecraft, that was a mod on a game called Infinimizer, and that was one person who did that, and the kernel of Fortnite was fewer than 10 people. So I still feel that even as just an individual, that there's a chance to make a difference in games. Another question that I get asked is, do you spend all day playing games? And the truth is that yeah, I actually kind of do. Except they're usually broken games. So I think it's important that we as game designers play games, and we play a huge variety of games. So I love Game Pass has been a, God, I hate to use this term, but I'm going to do it, game changer for me, just to be able to play and try a huge variety of games, good games, medium games, games with terrible ratings. I think there's something to learn from all of them. And so recently I've been playing a game called Dredge. Also, along with most of the world, I feel I've been playing Phantom Liberty. This weekend I'm planning to start the Lies of P, which I actually know nothing about. I was even reluctant to get the screenshot. I love going into games as blind as possible. I also spend a lot of time playing casual games. I kind of had my moment with Candy Crush, but the one that sticks around, interestingly enough, it's Frank Lance's game. There's some people from NYU here, and it's called Drop 7. And that game has been on my phone forever, and I still play it regularly. I've also played a whole bunch of Fall Guys, which I'm sure you know has been a huge breakout hit. And while people think, I often get people who are, say, not in academia, but will say to me, my God, this is like the perfect job for me, you get paid to play games. Where do I sign? I think that everybody in this room knows that making games isn't necessarily all playing them. Like I spend a lot of my time staring at a screen and thinking about games critically. Why was that fun? I will often, when I'm playing a game that I know is commercially successful, and has done really well or critically successful, I will set a timer on my phone, and when that timer goes off, I put down the controller or back away from the keyboard, and I write down every single thing that I can think of that my head is thinking about at that time. why is this core loop successful? Why do I want to keep playing? If I start thinking about the game outside of the game, I'm also writing like, what am I thinking about? Why do I care about this game? What is interesting to me about it? Because those are the metagame things that are amazing to reproduce if you can do that. So most of my job, I'd say, is spent staring at a screen. And sometimes I'm even like imagining or playing early versions of my own games, trying to figure out, this is a game we worked on called Empire of Sin. It was in Unity back in the old days. You know, I'm running in a game editor there, and I'm just trying to figure out why it's not fun, why the AI is working weird. And so most of this really means that I spend a lot of time playing unfinished games. And when it gets, you know, when it gets good enough and the publisher sends it out there, you know, then I'm back to the proverbial drawing board again. So for me, another reaction that I get is, what does a commercial game designer do? And though a lot of people say they want to make video games for a living, I do find like the perception of what a commercial game designer does is a bit wonky. You know, so first and foremost, I mean, the lightest possible description is that I create virtual worlds and experiences for players, and, you know, it might be a sci-fi setting, trying to create iconic characters. Iconic characters are very commercially viable. I swear I'm going to stop saying commercially soon, but it is a focus of my talk, part of it anyway. And, you know, so basically I'm trying to dream of the worlds that that people play in. So for me, when I explain my job, I'll often say, like, it's a lot like being an architect, you know, and from my plans, somebody's going to build a house. And this is a game I worked on in 1997. It was the last big Western RPG in the Wizardry series. And, you know, I would, like, these are the actual, I still draw levels in pencil. It's sort of, I don't know, it's a luxury that I like. So I would draw this. It's funny that I say they're similar to an architect's plans. I don't think they look anything like that, but I fooled myself and believed it. So anyway, I draw these plans, you know, and the programmers will come in and they'll try to build the skeleton of it. Where necessary, I work in some medical simulation games. We'll get subject matter experts in to provide us the information that we need. And then the artists come in and they act as the interior decorators, and they're trying to make it a beautiful space. But once we get that, like once we get this beautiful space, this is where, you know, like I've got the level design document, the level is made, but that's boring as hell. There's nothing going on there. And so my job really is to think, well, what if around that corner there were €1,000? And to get the €1,000, like if you could just walk around the corner and pick it up, that'd be pretty great. But it wouldn't be as exciting if there were a challenge that you felt you could succeed in. It maybe wouldn't be as fascinating or fun. Actually, we all know that's a lie. It'd just be pretty cool to walk around the corner and pick up €1,000, but just go with me on this. That if there were a challenge, if that challenge felt exciting, if you got rewards for that challenges. And so, you know, basically as a game designer, I'm a bit like a party planner, trying to see how, you know, to make that place come alive with things to do. You know, what's going to happen inside this house, or this one, or this one, or like this horrible one. And each one of these, to me, suggests a distinctly different experience. And if I go back to Minecraft for a moment, someone, you know, a game designer, Marcus Pearson in this case, thought of an experience that he wanted to share. And he made decisions about how that experience would work. Like, how do you walk? What happens at night? And what happens when you hit a tree? And it's very similar when I'm teaching game design. I will often use board games, because to me, board games make that there's nothing you can hide with board games. And in fact, I find board games harder to design than video games. So, you know, we write the rules of play, whether it's, you know, collect $200 when you pass go, buy unknown properties from the bank, and so on. You know, my goal anyway as a game designer is not just to make up the rules, but to figure out how to teach people the rules as they play. So I got into the tech industry pretty surprising, in a very surprising way actually, when I was just 15. So it was 1981, and I well remember the genuine magic of computers. It was something I'd never seen before. I started programming in BASIC. Then I moved to Pascal, because I thought that was the smart answer. Then I moved to assembly language. And so this is me, and I really would say I got my start in tech at 5, which is the age that I am there. So the stretch for tech is interesting. But this is when I started making games. And so my mom, I come from a really low income family, and so we would go to yard sales. That's where we got most of our stuff, or boot sales, flea markets, whatever you want to call them. And so my mom would give me a dime. And with that dime, I could get anything I wanted, except a dime doesn't go, it didn't go far then, it doesn't go very far now. But what I would get, I would find these board games. Not board games with other pieces, because those were probably a quarter or even $1. But with a dime, I could get these board game pieces, I could get board games, and I actually didn't care if all the pieces were there, it didn't matter. What I would do is I would collect the pieces. And then I would make my own board games. Like I remember, like I'd take a Monopoly board and just flip it over. And I remember when I was 10 for my birthday, I got a brand new Monopoly game, which I already had probably 5 of them from yard sales, missing some of the pieces. But I was delighted because I was out of boards, like custom boards that I could flip over and make my own stuff. And so I remember when I opened this present, it was from Patty Mills, and not that anybody needs to know that, but anyway, I opened it up, flipped it over, and I'm like, guys, what do you want me to make? And they're all like, what are you talking about? But you know, for me, that was really normal. I liked creating games, and I'm sure that they were all absolute garbage, you know, but to me as a young kid, they seemed great. And then when I was 11, also from a boot sale, my mother got me Dungeons and Dragons, the original white box edition, which I still have, and it is nowhere near in perfect condition. It has been dragged in and out of backpacks many times. And it's a little surprising to me because we all know that this game was one of the big harbingers of the satanic panic, and there were demons, and you know, full-scale demons inside this box. And my mother didn't know she's Irish Catholic, and I'm a little surprised that she didn't know that. But nonetheless, it is impossible to understate the effect that this game had on me. Like I was pretty well done going outside, because I could create worlds, I could do anything I wanted. It was so much more powerful than just board game parts and flipping over boards. And I feel like that's why I was so blown away by Stranger Things, because I was the unpopular low-income kid who played Dungeons and Dragons, who liked heavy metal, right? You know, who liked board games, who liked programming. I think you're all probably my people. But at the time, like now I feel like that's finally cool, but it definitely wasn't cool in the 80s. But I loved it. Like these kids were all going on adventures that I wanted to go on. So I graduated, when I was 14, I graduated to Rollmaster. And Rollmaster I did not like the rules for encumbrance, which obviously these are not the rules for encumbrance, but I decided to rewrite them. Like it was such a naive designer thing to do that I thought I could just rewrite these rules and things would work perfectly fine. And it didn't at all, but we called the system Brenda Law. Like I was very modest at the time. It's a closed to roll. Anyway, it's just ridiculous. We played it for a couple of years. I no longer have it, so it was. I can remember it as a work of genius, I suppose. When I got my first job in the game industry, as I mentioned, in 1981, and my job was there was really no functional internet for the average person at the time. So my job, 15 years old, my job was to play games, memorize them, answer the phone, and tell people. I was a living FAQ, basically. And this is the first game we worked on. It was Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. This is what it looked like, which was screaming state-of-the-art at the time. Wizardry, just a bit of trivia, Wizardry actually is the game. It becomes incredibly popular in Japan. It is the direct inspiration for Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, and the whole Final Fantasy series. And Wizardry still is really a really strong IP in Japan. And so this was life-changing for me as a kid from a lower-income background. You know, my mom, she was delighted that I had a job because I had access to computers that were worth more than the house we lived in. You know, it was an Apple II at the time. And so I fell headfirst into technology. Oh my God, I love coding so much. I thought it was the coolest thing I ever found. And if I had to do something twice, I would program it. Like I barely sent letters, but I made myself a label maker because to me, you know, code was more fun than Legos. It's where I met my first husband, here, pictured here, the Apple II. It's also where I met my second husband, so that's John, who created Doom, Quake, and many others. If there's any Doom fans, that's E1M7. I found out when I put this in the slide just in case somebody asked. And so I worked on a lot of games during those early years, and actually put myself through university working on games and in tech. And so at this point, I've been fortunate to launch over 50 games on pretty much everything from tabletop to consoles, to the latest consoles. Our current game is on the current gen. And I've even released games, believe it or not, in a literary magazine. And so from this time, so 1981 to 2023, I've been a game developer unbelievably 42 years. And so I've seen the rise of single player and multiplayer. It's going from arcades, where I spent more quarters than I care to imagine, even seeing the rise of consoles like the PlayStation and the Nintendo Entertainment System. I've watched their massive transformation all the way up till today, and as Mads mentioned, I've been involved in just over 50 games at this point, from Dungeons and Dragons to Def Jam to Ghost Recon, and I've made games on everything from the Apple II to the PlayStation 5 and Xbox. And I think, like, my retirement game, as I call it, is I never released a game in 6502 assembly language on the Apple II, and so we got an Apple II just so I can program it. Unbelievably, this is such a random piece of trivia, we actually own 9 Apple IIs, none of which ran. One ran for 15 minutes and then died. But here's the greatest thing about Ireland. Everybody knows everybody, and there's an Apple II hardware engineer that lives in Ireland. So I now have 4 running Apple IIs. I just got an Apple IIe Platinum. I now have fully earned my nerd cred. Anyway, my retirement game is going to be a game, I don't even know what it'll be, but I'm going to code it in 6502 so I can check that box from 81. So when I first got into games, they were absolutely a hobby. And I remember coming out of college, and I was working, so I work on games all the way through. I stay working at Surtech Software all the way through college. I came out with a degree in technical communications, which sounds like a modernish degree, but really I didn't know what to do at the time, so my coursework was half programming and half English, and then you figure out how to put that together. And I guess it actually was a pretty good background for game designers. So I thought, like, okay, when I come out of college, I need to get a real job, and I interviewed with IBM, and I remember them saying, well, you'll be editing DOS manuals. I thought, no, I won't. There's no way I'll do that. So I just went back to Surtech, and I'm like, I think I'd like to keep making games, and I ended up staying there for 20 years. So I didn't get a job. I came out of college, and I just kept making games. And I'm sure everybody knows, like, the commercial game market is massive today. It is contracting. I feel like a lot of people weren't doing anything during the pandemic, so game playing went up and revenue went up, and now people are out and about again, and the economy is contracting. And so our industry has certainly seen a huge number of layoffs during that time. And game-based learning and research are growing fields, obviously, as everybody in this room knows. So there's a huge range of gamers out there. When I talk to people, inevitably they will either tell me that they play tons of games or they play no games at all whatsoever. Sometimes their last game is Pong. Or they played Doom in 1993. I hear a surprising amount of people who say that not to me, they say it to John, that it caused them to fail out of college. They might play games on mobile devices. And I think the audience is way more broad now than it used to be. When I was growing up, people would often just say, well, it's white people and boys in their parents' basement. And that demographic actually only fits 21% of gamers now. So women own the most consoles. And Hispanic people play the most games. So given that my husband is Hispanic and I'm a woman, I think our house is pretty well sorted. So the impact of games, and the impact of games beyond game developers, say people like me, is massive. We're not just players, people are streaming games now on YouTube. Like, it's so much bigger than I ever could have imagined it being. And people are modding games and creating and selling their own content. There's esports teams, and these have actually become a standard part of the sports scene. My husband has, oddly enough, become an esports player in his own game, which wasn't intended, but people would invite him to conferences and ask him to play, and he didn't lose, so he kept doing it. Anyway, it's obviously massive business, and I know everybody knows this. Like pre-COVID times, League of Legends, succeeded in filling stadiums. And I think we are all part of games culture. Like if you were using an iPhone, or you're using a phone that looks like an iPhone, that originally comes from Apple. And Apple started because of a game. It started because of the game Breakout. Steve Wozniak wanted to make it, and he met Steve Jobs at Atari. Reddit, that started because of a game called Quake, and so there's a long, long list. And culturally speaking, in the last 42 years, the most substantial thing for me as a game developer isn't saying like, oh, wow, cool, that great new game. It's that people are doing things like this. Having grown up, people saying, well, yeah, but are you going to get a real job at some point in time? Like, you're seriously you got a college degree, you're going to make games? Seeing games accepted as something that's worthy of research, that it's worthy of study, that it's gone from a waste of time to an incredible form of culture. Games have been around for a very long time. The game that she's playing there is a game called Senate, so no rule sets currently survive. And so when I see academic conferences like this one happening, this tells me, this along with, I'd say, the BAFTA awards, that they're acknowledging games, as one of their 3 pillars. For me, this is the moment that we have arrived, not when some new technology hits the industry. And as much as I talk about this, and I love games, and I've literally done nothing else in my life, and I think games are an art form, I think games are culture, I think games are something with a soul, that I've loved games since I was a kid. In reality, for me, games are entirely commercial ventures, and there's really nothing that is the soul of a system. The soul of a system is cash. It's cash and more cash. It's DLC. It's that long train. And like games have to be. In my entire career, I've lived by this mantra. Games need to be fun. They need to be entertaining. They need to be a good time. And above all, they must be commercially successful. And I think that's kind of shit. Because imagine if all books were that way, or all research were that way, or all paintings were that way, or all music was that way. Like, we would just really have to get rid of all blues, and probably most Irish music as well. I think about like research for that matter. Like, what if research had those same constraints? So to me, this notion of the notion of what the commercial game industry pins on us really affects the soul of things that what things can become. And so all this changed for me in 2006-07 at a dinner. So I was then the chair of the games department at Savannah College of Art and Design, and part of my job as the chair was to eat, to take people to dinner and eat. And so at one dinner, there was a bunch of different people there at the time, and one dinner I'm seated at a table with all photographers and me. And one of those photographers happened to be Zig Jackson. So Zig Jackson is an incredibly well-regarded photographer. He's in the Library of Congress, and he's the only Native American photographer to be in there. And so this is one of his photographs, and so he takes this sign and he plants it all over the place, and he takes photographs of it. So Zig's Indian Reservation. This is another one of his photographs, something more traditional. So he works to capture Native culture in a variety of forms. But some of his most powerful work comes at exploring at how we look, how white people look at indigenous populations. And so there's this picture. This is a picture called Degradation. And on the surface, maybe it seems innocent, but here's some people posing next to a real Native person. And I think about my husband's Cherokee and Yaqui, and I think about if somebody came up to him and said, "Come here, let's get your picture with the Native American. Pose, honey." Oh my God. That would just be so incredibly just not okay. And this is another one, which is Indian photographing tourists photographing Indian. This is one of Zig's photographs. And so over dinner, part of this discussion, and I'm just taking this in, as a game designer, if there's a conversation and I don't really understand that area of expertise, I want to hear as much as I can to learn. And so one of the topics that came up was a really difficult one. It was a shooting at an Indian reservation. And so when Zig heard about it, he instinctively got his photographer, he got his camera, and he headed to the reservation. And when he got there, he found he couldn't do it. He wasn't going to take the pictures. And this whole topic, especially around really painful moments came up, like, do you take the picture or not? And it was one of the most intense discussions that I've ever been witness to. And it made me think about something like that in that exact moment, that every other medium captures and expresses difficult emotions except for mine. Like, we don't even think about it. Well, I certainly didn't think about it. And games just didn't do that. Like, we were like all about happy things, right? Like jumping from this or war. We nailed war. Like, or explosions, or war and explosions. And, obviously there are exceptions. This is a game called Journey. But they're not the rule. Like, they're pretty rare. And so in 2009, I had this moment at this dinner where my head goes, God, I've never thought about, do I make the game or not? Like, even at the time that sounded, I don't know, it sounded alien even. So in 2009, my daughter comes home from school, and I asked her what she did that day, as I do every day. And she was young at the time, and so she said, we talked about the Middle Passage. So her father's from the West Indies, from Barbados, and so I said to her, this is part of her history, right? So I wasn't, obviously, I was expecting we were going to talk about this at some point in time, and so I stop what I'm doing, and I say, well, so what do you think about that? And so she said, well, and she was all, very studied on it, so she said, well, some ships came down from England, and they went to Africa, and then they picked up the black people, and then they went across the ocean, that's the Middle Passage, and they got to the United States, and then they were sold into slavery, but Abraham Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation, and then they were free. There was a pause for breath, and then she said, can I play a game, Mommy? And so I thought, basically the way she described it, some black people went on a cruise. And I have she wants to play a game, and so being a game designer, I happen to have a lot of prototype parts sitting around. And so I said, yeah, you can play a game. So I gave her these, and I asked her to paint me some pieces. I'm really grateful. I'm so grateful I photographed this. So I asked her to paint me some pieces, and so she did. So there's the pieces she painted. And I asked her to make me families. So, we see a mommy and a daddy and the kids. And when the paint was dry, I grabbed a boat. And obviously, this is the boat that I had. This is not a planned game. And so I just started grabbing people at random and putting them on the boat. And she's putting, you forgot the yellow baby and you forgot the pink daddy or whatever. And I'm saying, no, they don't all want to go. She's like, yes, they do. They want to be together. And I said, no, this is not how this works. This is the Middle Passage. And so then now we're crossing the ocean. And bear in mind, she's 7 at the time, right? So this is pretty abstracted. So I make up these rules on the spot. It takes 10 turns for us to cross the ocean. We have 30 units for food. Each turn we roll a die, and we use that amount of food. So we're halfway across the ocean, and she's rolling pretty high. And she says, I don't think we're going to make it. What do we do? And so I said, well, we can put some people in the water. She's 7. She knew what it meant. Or we can hope we make it and hope people don't get sick. And so now this is during in the US, there's something called Black History Month, and which is kind of ridiculous. But